Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in Junior English. We are in our MyPerspectives volume now on pages 338, 339. We are in Unit 3, Power, Protest, and Change. And we now turn to the Declaration of Sentiments, Elizabeth Cady Stanton's classic. Now, it is one of the many arguments that I can give to you as to why it is that we need to read and study in American political history and thought, and literature, of course. Because we will find easily that we will take for granted things that are, for us, it gets dark at night obvious, like women should be allowed to have the same kinds of rights and privileges as men. Of course, some of you are looking at me like, well, no, duh. But we should point out this was not always the case, and where the movement really gained traction will be in readings such as this one. Let's turn now. We're going to do some background reading with our professional reader first, and then we'll get to the reading on page 339.
Declaration of Sentiments by Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Public document. Background. In 1848, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott convened the first Women's Rights Conference to demand that women be given basic human rights, including the right to vote, to own property, and to have equal status under the law. Of those who attended the conference in Seneca Falls, New York, about a third, 32 men and 68 women, signed the Declaration of Sentiments. The document was highly controversial. An article published shortly after the convention described it as the most shocking and unnatural event ever recorded in the history of humanity.
You want to note
About
that?
the author.
I'm on page 338.
Elizabeth Cady Stanton, born 1815, died 1902, became interested in reform movements through a cousin who introduced her to Henry Brewster Stanton, an abolitionist. Cady and Stanton married in 1840, agreeing that the bride's promise to obey her husband would be omitted from their vows. Stanton was the primary writer of the Declaration of Sentiments, adopted at the 1848 Seneca Falls Convention. Later, Stanton and Susan B. Anthony founded the National Woman Suffrage Association.
Page 339.
Declaration of Sentiments by Elizabeth Cady Stanton.
When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one portion of the family of man to assume among the people of the earth a position different from that which they have hitherto occupied, but one to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes that impel them to such a course. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of those who suffer from it to refuse allegiance to it, and to insist upon the institution of a new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form, as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness.
Page 340.
Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of the women under this government, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to demand the equal station to which they are entitled. The history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man toward woman, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has never permitted her to exercise her inalienable right to the elective franchise. He has compelled her to submit to laws, in the formation of which she had no voice. He has withheld from her rights which are given to the most ignorant and degraded men, both natives and foreigners. Having deprived her of this first right of a citizen, the elective franchise, thereby leaving her without representation in the halls of legislation, he has oppressed her on all sides. He has made her, if married, in the eye of the law, civilly dead. He has taken from her all right in property, even to the wages she earns. He has made her, morally, an irresponsible being, as she can commit many crimes with impunity, provided they be done in the presence of her husband. In the covenant of marriage, she is compelled to promise obedience to her husband, he becoming, to all intents and purposes, her master, the law giving him power to deprive her of her liberty and to administer chastisement. He has so framed the laws of divorce as to what shall be the proper causes, and in case of separation, to whom the guardianship of the children shall be given, as to be wholly regardless of the happiness of women. The law, in all cases, going upon a false supposition of the supremacy of man, and giving all power into his hands. After depriving her of all rights as a married woman, if single and the owner of property, he has taxed her to support a government which recognizes her only when her property can be made profitable to it. He has monopolized nearly all the profitable employments, and from those she is permitted to follow, she receives but a scanty remuneration. He closes against her all the avenues to wealth and distinction which he considers most honorable to himself. As a teacher of theology, medicine, or law, she is not known. He has denied her the facilities for obtaining a thorough education, all colleges being closed against her. He allows her in church as well as state, but a subordinate position, claiming apostolic authority for her exclusion from the ministry, and, with some exceptions, from any public participation in the affairs of the church. He has created a false public sentiment by giving to the world a different code of morals for men and women, by which moral delinquencies which exclude women from society are not only tolerated, but deemed of little account in man. He has usurped the prerogative of Jehovah himself, claiming it as his right to assign for her a sphere of action, when that belongs to her conscience and to her God. He has endeavored, in every way that he could, to destroy her confidence in her own powers, to lessen her self-respect, and to make her willing to lead a dependent and abject life. Now, in view of this entire disfranchisement of one half the people of this country, their social and religious degradation, in view of the unjust laws above mentioned, and because women do feel themselves aggrieved, oppressed, and fraudulently deprived of their most sacred rights, we insist that they have immediate admission to all the rights and privileges which belong to them as citizens of the United States. In entering upon the great work before us, we anticipate no small amount of misconception, misrepresentation, and ridicule, but we shall use every instrumentality within our power to effect our object. We shall employ agents, circulate tracts, petition the state and national legislatures, and endeavor to enlist the pulpit and the press in our behalf. We hope this convention will be followed by a series of conventions embracing every part of the country, firmly relying upon the final triumph of the right and the true. We do this day affix our signatures to this declaration.
Notice it's the right and the true. Now let's go back to the beginning and just point out that what Elizabeth Cady Stanton does is to just build from a previous text, the Declaration of Independence. Now we've commented on the power of the Declaration of Independence throughout American thought. So for example, when we studied Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, there's a whole lot of the DOI in that speech as well, and so you will see it here. Now notice, no one is going to accuse Stanton of plagiarism because it's obvious that this is the declaration of sentiments. Here, sentiments meaning are demanding our rights as women. Notice that we'll begin with the same language of the DOI. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands that have connected them to another. In that paragraph ending, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they declare the causes that impel them to the separation. Here, notice it's this course of action. And then right away, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. And then from there, notice the language, and go back and study closer the language between the Declaration of Independence and the wording here. So it's in large measure almost exactly the same. I'm on to page 340. The idea of prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes will take us to the argument a few lines later of the duty and the necessity. Now go back to our comments on the Declaration of Independence. The brilliance of the rhetorical prose of Jefferson was to argue this is not something that we really want to do, it's something that we have to do. We have no choice. It is a necessity. In other words, we've tried every other means possible to have conversations and the like, and nobody's listening to us. This is the last thing we have that we can do. Notice the argument is being made here as well. We have no choice in the matter. Now it is a necessity, and we will provide facts. Let facts be submitted to a candid world is the final line of introduction in the original Declaration of Independence. And then you're going to get 13 of the he at the very beginning. And of course in the DOI it was George III. Here, of course, it's going to be he, representative of the patriarchy of men. You've actually got 15 times that the pronoun he is used specifically to say what it is that men have not allowed women to do. Notice in paragraph in paragraph 7, he's made her, women, if married in the eye of the law, civilly dead. And from there we'll go to paragraph 17, where he's endeavored in every way he could to destroy her confidence. So notice, from death to destroy. The language is provocative, no question about it. Notice that in paragraph 13, education is going to be highlighted, and this was a big deal because much as the movement to gain rights for emancipated slaves, the argument will always be about education and educational equality. And notice the argument here is that women haven't been given the same educational opportunities, especially as it relates to theology, medicine, and law, the kind of, the holy trinity of the day. If you're going to be somebody, then you want to be able to be educated in those three domains, and again, not allowed whatsoever. In the end, then, notice on to page 342, the way that it ends is to even use the word religious degradation, social and religious degradation. Notice the use of the word immediate. We insist that women have immediate admission. In other words, this has got to happen now. We're not willing to talk about delaying. Go back to our study of Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream, and the way in which he will respond, along with Letter from a Birmingham Jail, about this idea. You'll get your rights, you just have to wait. Notice here, it is immediate. And then finally, notice, she will call it in paragraph 19, the great work. In other words, this is something important, and she will argue that we will use the pulpit and the press. In other words, we will use the primary means of articulating our needs through the pulpit, that is to say, of course, religious gatherings, and then the press playing a huge role in helping women finally get the right of suffrage. Now, I want you to turn to these guiding questions on 342 and following, and then we'll come back to enjoying a conversation that I hope will be fun and exciting. Thank you.